Hello, and thank you so much for tuning in. So in today's video, I'm going to be reviewing the Kaleidos Smokey Nostalgia Collection. In this collection, there are 2 eyeshadow quads, 5 blushes, and 4 new shades of their Cloud Lab lip clays. There is also this dresser back here, but I'm just going to be talking about the makeup today. If there is one facet of this collection that you are particularly interested in, there will be timestamps in the description to get you where you need to go, but I will be starting off talking about the eyeshadow quads. So as I mentioned earlier, there are 2 eyeshadow quads in the collection, and here I'm holding one of them. This is the Cold Brew quad, and these quads retail for $22 a piece. And I first need to talk about the packaging because the packaging on these is quite unique and quite luxe. These quads come in this sort of padded lace packaging that reminds me of a vintage coin purse, and the Kaleidos logo is going across the front in this sort of 3D chrome sort of like embellishment, but it's very nice packaging overall. And did I mention that it's $22? Because honestly, like, there are luxury brands out here charging way more for their eyeshadow quads and quints, and the packaging isn't even half as nice as this, so I definitely had to point this one out. And when you open up the quad, you'll see that you get 4 shades on the inside, and the quads are both set up in exactly the same way. I won't be able to show you the Black Jasmine one in this shot in any event because it arrived with one of the shades shattered. I did reach out to Kaleidos and they offered either a refund or reshipment. In the many times I've ordered from Kaleidos, this is the first and only time I've ever had to reach out to their customer service, but it was handled well. So in case you were ever wondering what Kaleidos' customer service was like, that was just my personal experience. But this one arrived completely intact, so I wanted to just show this one to you to give you a general idea of how the quads are laid out. So you have these 3 shades here that are matte, and then you have this shade here in the upper right hand corner that is a shimmer. So the 3 mattes kind of operate in a gradient, and this quad, you've got this sort of brown, cool tone, neutral brown gradient, and the Black Jasmine quad is a little bit more of like a monochrome gray to black gradient. And the shades in here do not have names, but they do have, well, they don't have specific names. They kind of more so have general ideas of where you're supposed to place the shades, but it's definitely done in a more creative way than crease and transition. So you have the lightest matte here that's called base, the mid-tone matte called diffuse, and the darkest matte here called accentuate. And then the shimmer shade is called radiate, and it's like that in both of the quads. With that out of the way, we can get into the swatches and 2 looks that I did with the quads, and then I'll come back with my thoughts. as for my thoughts on the quads, I really ended up liking these. They were definitely what drew me to this collection in the first place, but I honestly didn't expect that I would enjoy them so much. The matte formula here, which is the predominant formula that you're getting since there are 3 mattes in each of the quads, is actually quite nice, which, to be honest, I have really enjoyed Kaleidos' eyeshadow formula, but their shimmers have always way outperformed their mattes in my opinion. I don't think that they generally have bad mattes, but their mattes have been pretty mediocre, and this matte formula definitely seems different. It's a little bit more powdery, it's a little bit more of a soft formula, so I will say in that sense it's a little bit more fragile and you'll want to be a little bit careful with it. But in terms of actually getting a really nice blend out of the shadows, I feel like I was able to achieve that in a way that I prefer, kind of working with shadows that kind of have that sort of softer, more powdery formula that you can sometimes also create more of like an airbrushed look with, which I felt I was able to get out of these shades. And the shimmers in both of the quads were fantastic. I think these are some of the best, if not the best, shimmers that Kaleidos has ever done. And that's saying a lot because Kaleidos' strong suit is their shimmer eyeshadow formula. They have a shimmer eyeshadow formula that rivals these special shades from luxury brands like Pat McGrath Labs and Natasha Denona. So to see these formulas be even better than previous ones is honestly a little bit astonishing, but I really love the formulas in both of the quads. They are 2 different formulas, I will say though. Well, I guess I should say that I'm assuming they are, because remember I mentioned earlier that the shimmer shade in my Black Jasmine quad came shattered, so that could have affected the way that it actually performs. But from what I could tell, the shimmer in Black Jasmine does seem like it's a chunkier, flakier formula, and the shimmer formula in Cold Brew is a little bit more firmly pressed. So what I found is that with the shimmer shade in Cold Brew, I was able to use that one without a glitter glue or any kind of adhesive, whereas the shimmer shade in the Black Jasmine quad, I feel like you will probably benefit from using a glitter glue of some sort. I have gone without using a glitter glue with that shimmer shade, but I find that I definitely have more fallout with that shade if I don't go in with a glitter glue. And I think in the demo, I actually showcased what the shimmer shade from the Cold Brew quad looked like with glitter glue, and I probably should have done it with the shimmer shade from Black Jasmine, because that is definitely the chunkier shade. That's the one where I feel like more people are going to feel it a little bit of a necessity to put down something like a glitter glue, whereas with Radiate, I think you can, or Radiate from the Cold Brew quad, I think you can get away with that shade on its own without really having to go in with another adhesive. So I've done several looks with both quads, and I think that they both look amazing and they work well together. I'm wearing them both on my eyes today, and I love the way that the grays kind of coordinate with the brown tones, and they also work really well on their own. And I have also done a look where I use just the matte shades, or predominantly the matte shades, in the quads, and those looks turned out really nicely as well. I really wanted to, again, put that matte formula to the test because that is mostly what you're getting here. And again, Kaleidos isn't really known for their mattes, but like I said, the mattes in this formula have been really great. The only thing that I would say is a con, I feel, is that because it's a more powdery formula, you do need to be careful with it. If you do start to build it up too much, or you go in with a little bit too much, you can get what I call like a dragon scale effect on the lids, where it just looks very like dry and textured on your lids. So just be careful with the formula, use a light hand, and I would say spend more time kind of blending it out and diffusing the formula, which the formula does lend itself pretty well to that type of work, albeit it might take a little bit of time. It does lend itself well to that kind of technique, and you do get that kind of nice airbrush look with these, and you won't have to worry about there being too much product on the eye. That's really all I have to say about the quads. I love these. I think, like I said earlier, I love these even more than I expected to. I love cool tone neutrals, and I think this was a really nice added addition to their line. I especially enjoy the fact that I can, as a person with a darker complexion, use all 4 of the shades in the palette. Like I said, I'm wearing both of the quads on my eyes today, and in my inner corner and even in the inner part of the crease, I have on the lightest shade, the base shade from Black Jasmine, which is that lightest gray color, and I think it looks great on my complexion. And the lightest shade in the Cold Brew quad is also usable on my skin tone as well, and sometimes I actually mix the base shade, the lightest matte, with the mid-tone matte, because sometimes I find that the mid-tone matte in both of the quads is too dark for what I'm looking for a transition shade, so it actually helps to kind of of blend both of those together. And I can also just use the lightest shade on its own to kind of do a little bit more of a gradient, kind of creating a lighter shade in the inner portion of the crease and then going in with a mixture of the two on the outer portion. So I love the quads. I can't say enough about them. Honestly, just thinking about them being $22 compared to like some other quads that are out there, it isn't necessarily the best value for Kaleidos, considering that their Futurism palettes are 6 pans and those cost $24. But in the grand scheme of things, I do think that this is such a great formula, and for $22 for what you're getting, I think it is definitely well worth it. I believe these are going to be permanent, so if you did want to like catch these on sale, I think you'll be able to do so in the future. But personally, if you were looking for a cool tone, neutral, small collection of eyeshadows, I think that these quads are definitely something to look into if that's what you're in the market for. Now let's move on to the blushes, and I'm just going to say up front that I don't have as many glowing things to say about the blushes. And spoiler alert, it's not actually about the formula, because I do quite enjoy the formula of the blushes. It's more so to do with the shade range on the blushes. So there are 5 shades here, and this is not Kaleidos' first time at the rodeo with blushes. So given the way the last iteration of blushes went, I was expecting a little bit more from them in terms of shade range, but let the swatches do the talking and we will come back and discuss. So hopefully you could tell how these blushes look on my complexion from my swatches. I will say that for the sake of showing them off or showcasing them as best as I could, I definitely built them up more than I would traditionally do with a blush. And I will also say that some of the shades I think looked a little bit more prominent on camera in the natural lighting where I was sitting than they actually did in real life. So that's something I wanted to just note here. Regarding the packaging on the blushes, this is the darkest shade, Sanguine. So as I was editing this, I was like, why do I keep saying sanguine? And yes, I do say this throughout the duration of the video, and yes, I am aware that it is sanguine. This is the cautionary tale of what happens when you film after midnight, after a full day of work. Sanguine. And it's the same exact kind of packaging as the eyeshadow quads, this sort of like lace padded packaging, lace all the way around, and you open it up, it does have a mirror here. The only thing that I don't like about these blushes, aside from the shade range, which we'll talk about, is the fact that there's no names on the blushes, and you do have this part here on the spine that says Kaleidos. So I feel like since you already have the Kaleidos logo on the outside, they could have easily just put the name on the spine of the blush, because there are 5 blushes and some of the packaging looks kind of similar, and there are a couple of blushes that look similar as well. So I feel like they kind of did themselves a disservice by not putting the name on here, because I found it a little bit hard to remember which ones were which. I think I have got it now, but just in general, know that if you are thinking about buying a couple of these, especially if you're buying a couple of similar shades, that they won't have the names on them. Unfortunately, having used all 5 of the shades, tried them out, tested them out, even on multiple occasions, I can really say that there's only one shade that really works well for me, and that's the darkest shade, which is Sanguine. And I'm really disappointed in that. You know, I bought the whole collection and I wasn't expecting all 5 shades to work for me, because I could tell that that just wasn't going to be the case. But I did think that maybe I could swing like at least 2 or 3 of them. And in a sense, I guess if I was going for more of like an editorial kind of look, then I could push it on these. But the problem with the 4 shades that are not as rich as Sanguine is that they all pretty much have kind of like a white cast to them. Maybe the one exception being Joyride. Joyride just ends up being like too close to my skin tone to really do anything. But the other 3 certainly have a very white cast to them and a white base to them, and so they don't show up very well initially, and then when you try to build them up, that white cast kind of starts to show even more. And on top of that, with this formula being as powdery as it is, because this is a very powdery formula, kind of like the matte eyeshadows, these end up looking very powdery on the face the more that you build them up. And hopefully you could tell in the swatches with Sanguine, and that's the shade that I'm wearing on my cheeks today. That shade, I didn't have to do near the amount of building, because that shade just automatically worked well on my complexion. And that is a quite deep shade. It's a quite rich shade. And I could tell that this is supposed to be a quite pigmented formula based on the way that Sanguine performs. So I imagine somebody with a lighter skin tone is going to have an easy time applying those lighter shades. It's just that for me on my complexion, I could not get those shades to show up. And again, wasn't expecting them to, but to only have one shade that works for me in a collection of 5 blushes, I think is disappointing. Again, going back to the last time that Kaleidos tried to do blushes, which was worse because last time they had 2 shades and they were clearly for people with very light complexions. And to add insult to injury, they utilized packaging that suggested that they were supposed to be for people with darker skin tones, or at the very least they wanted to evoke imagery of people with darker skin tones without actually making products that work for people with darker skin tones. So at least that's not happening here, and there's one shade, but unfortunately that's just not enough in my opinion. It's also a shame that this is kind of like a bigger, broader point about collections in general, but like I said, I bought the whole collection. And I actually have those 2 blushes from last time because I bought that collection too, because the difference between getting everything else that I did want to try and just those 2 blushes was like $6. So I just got the whole collection. And in this case, I really, really wanted to try the blush formula and I wanted everything else. So I just went ahead and got the collection. But it's unfortunate that a lot of times collections, nobody's thinking about darker skin tones when they're putting together collections. And that's not to say that every single product in a collection needs to work for somebody who has a darker complexion, but it's like, if you're going to have that option, like at least think like what's going to work best and maybe have options geared towards people of different complexions. You know what I mean? Or at least have people be able to pick like a couple of shades of a blush or something along those lines. So in this case, I wasn't really feeling the blushes just because I feel like 1 out of 5 just wasn't good enough. And it's unfortunate because I like the formula. So let me explain to you what I enjoy about this formula. It ends up looking very airbrushed on the skin, even though it's a powder. It kind of reminds me of, again, how the eyeshadows performed, and the blush is even more sort of effortless to work with. versus the eyeshadows. It was very easy to apply, very easy to blend out, and I just loved the way that it looked. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a powder blush look as good as this one has on my skin. Like, I think that's where we are with this blush. This might be one of, if not my just favorite powder blush formula. Hard to say because I only have one shade that I can use. So I do like this formula, and honestly, I hope that Kaleidos expands the shade range because everybody, in my opinion, should be able to try out this formula. It is fantastic, but I only have experience with one shade. I can only really thoroughly review one shade because that's the only shade that could work for my complexion. And I feel like Kaleidos even knows that the range of blushes wasn't suited for people with dark skin because they did not, at least as of me filming this, which I imagine it's not going to change because the collection has been out for a while, they did not even have swatches of these blushes on somebody with a darker complexion. And Kaleidos has been pretty consistent about showcasing their products on people with darker skin tones. Even with the other products in this collection, the lipsticks and the eyeshadows, you can see swatches of the products on a darker model. You can see the products applied on a darker model. And for the blushes, there's literally only one model showcasing the blushes, and that model does not have a dark skin tone. So it's like, to me, a little bit of an admission from Kaleidos themselves of like, hey, we know that these blushes are not going to work for people with darker skin, but it's just disappointing because it's like, with what happened last time, like you would think that and you would hope that there would be more emphasis on creating some shades that would work for darker skin tones. Again, not all of them, but there should have been more emphasis on, okay, what do we do to make a better shade range? Because last time we really messed up. And I don't feel like that was really executed on here well at all. So now moving into something a little bit more positive again, let's talk about the lip clays. I have a very high opinion of the lip clays as well, and this is actually my first time trying the formula, even though this is just a shade extension. I really wanted to try this formula and I just hadn't gotten around to, so I saw the shades that were being offered in this collection. I really liked all of them. It seemed to be a nice variety, you know, a lighter shade, a couple of more mid-tone / kind of deeper shades, this very deep vampy shade. So I decided to pick up this collection. With that out of the way, we'll get into the swatches and I'll come back with my thoughts. So this was definitely a very unique lipstick formula for me, and I had heard people say that they felt the same way as well. I've also heard some people say that it is similar to some K-beauty formulas, but I haven't tried any K-beauty lipsticks, so this is the first time I've experienced a formula quite like this. It's interesting because it does go on like a moussier liquid lipstick. It does look matte on the lips, and it somewhat kind of dries down in the sense that it kind of has like a powdery feel, a velvety feel to it, but it still has a pretty decent amount of slip, which is interesting to me because other liquid lipsticks in the past that I've tried that like still have somewhat of a slip to them, I feel like they don't tend to look extremely matte or powdery on the lips, and this one, like this formula does. And then formulas I've tried that look this matte or powdery transfer. So like the closest thing that I can think of as far as like how these feel on the lips, it kind of reminds me of the feeling of the MAC Powder Kiss liquid lip colors, but those transfer. And these don't really. There can be a little bit of transfer if you really build up the lip color, which I have done here. And sometimes you will find that you have that kind of like outer ring of transfer, which I have had that happen even with transfer proof liquid drying down matte liquid lipsticks. But they really do stay in place very well. And for science, I actually I was wearing one day and it stayed on well. I took off the rest of my makeup, but I left it on intentionally, went to sleep, and it was still intact on my lips the next morning. So this is definitely one of those formulas that is not going anywhere. I will say that I think it would be prudent for anybody to take my review here with a grain of salt as far as how I feel about these. In general, that's prudent advice, but especially because I'm like one of 5 people who still actually enjoys and wears liquid lipsticks on a pretty regular and consistent basis. So I feel like I could still see a world in which if you don't like liquid lipsticks, you might not actually enjoy this, because one of the things that I will say is that even though it's an interesting formula, it definitely feels more comfortable than other more drying liquid lipsticks. I still think that this feels dry on the lips. It does have a powdery sort of feeling to it. And on top of that, I think that you will still need to do a lot of the prep work that you would be used to doing for a liquid lipstick, like kind of just making sure your lips are in like tip-top shape. And I'm saying this as somebody who, I love liquid lipsticks, but I do have chronically dry lips, so I can't wear them all the time because my lips are not always in the best condition. And if I'm being real and honest today, I should have exfoliated my lips before I sat down to do this, but I just quite frankly didn't have the time. So this is this is what we ended up with. And if you don't do that, it does have a tendency to kind of like catch onto and sort of cling to the drier parts of your lips. So that's definitely something to note. But I will say that, yeah, it's a very interesting formula. Let me show you a kiss test to show you how much product transfers. So there's product transfer, and you can see there's that kind of like ring going on. But I will say that, well, one, for today, I built this shade up. And that's something I should have mentioned earlier, but I didn't. These shades, I think, really can change depending on how much you build them up. They're quite sheer initially, but you can build them up quite deep. So this is the shade Smeared Rouge, which I think looked very different in the swatch portion of the video so then it looks now, because in this instance I've really built up the shade. So that's very interesting. I think that it's not as drastic with the lighter shades or the other shades. I think it's most drastic with this shade because this shade is, extremely deep, rich, pigmented, but that's definitely something of note. I think that makes this a very versatile formula, but I do like that kind of sheerness that they have because especially with the lighter shade, that's a shade where if I built it up, it would look too high contrast on my skin. But because it has that sheerness, I think you can kind of see through to my natural lip colors. You can see through to the fact that my top lip is darker than my bottom lip, and it just looks a little bit less high contrast and more like it blends in. It just looks better on my complexion. So I like that the formula actually does that. But going back to what I was saying earlier about the transfer, so you see that there's some transfer there, but most of the lipstick is still intact on my lips. And I expected, based on how based on how my lips felt as they were pressing against my hand, I expected a lot more transfer. And I guess that's what I'm trying to get to, is that these feel like they would transfer a lot more than they actually do. And I just my brain doesn't quite comprehend how that's possible. That's kind of really what I wanted to get to. I will say the lightest shade seemed like it was the driest out of the 4, but I honestly don't know if that's because that's the one that I wear in the lightest application. So perhaps in lighter applications, the formula is drier, and when you do sort of heavier applications, the formula becomes more moussey, because even now I've been sitting here and talking, and the formula is still it still has a nice sort of plush feel to it. It's a powdery, soft plushness. It's not like a super hydrating, it's none of that. So that's why I say if you don't like liquid lipsticks, you still might not like this. So those are my thoughts on the collection. Overall, I love the eyeshadow quads. I honestly, genuinely, as a lover of cool tone neutrals, I feel like those quads were made for me, and the packaging is just the cherry on top because it's beautiful. As for the lip clays, I love those. I definitely am wanting to get more. I just really enjoy the versatility of them, the longevity of them, the way that they feel on the lips, the various colors they come in. So I definitely am interested in trying more of those. And the blushes, oh, those are the one sore spot in the entire collection. And not even because of the formula, because the formula might be one of the best powder blushes I've ever tried. And that's what makes it so infuriating, because I actually really like the blushes, or at least the one that I was able to wear. But I can't say for sure because I wasn't able to try other shades. I would love to try other shades in that formula. It's amazing. So Kaleidos, please expand the shade range of that formula. You've got a good thing going for you. You just need to expand the shade range. And it's just like, I don't know, like we've done the foundations and the concealers, and I'm still sitting here waiting for like the part where we get to like talking about expanding color cosmetics ranges for people with darker skin tones, because blushes especially is just so, it's difficult. I mean, there are brands that have my back, you know, a lot of Black owned brands like Mented, Marina Butte, LYS, Colored Rain, and then there's some brands that have just been making blushes for eons, and they have a lot of shades like MAC and NARS, but so many brands just won't even make blushes or consider blushes for people with darker skin tones. And I don't know why that is. I feel like some of the things about why the makeup industry doesn't make certain products for darker skin tones is like tied into some weird beliefs about what people with dark skin can and can't wear, and it's just like, it bothers me so much. But in any event, expand the blush range. That's the one thing that I have to say of great critical note. But otherwise, I did enjoy the collection. I just wish that Kaleidos had thought it through a little bit more when it came to the blush range, especially given what happened last time they did blushes. I'm not letting that go. But let me know what your thoughts are on the collection and whether or not you plan on picking anything up, or your thoughts if you have picked up anything yet. If you found this video informative and or enjoyable, feel free to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for like content. But either way, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.